Let's talk about today's webinar. We are very pleased and fortunate to have two amazing guests today, Dr. Bex Port, the VP of Talent at Netflix, and Amy Schultz, Director of Organizational Effectiveness and Learning at DTE Energy, two companies many would consider essential services for probably different reasons. One, to keep the lights on in your home, the other to keep the lights on in your brain. Today's conversation will be facilitated, as always, by our co-founder and CEO, Dr. David Rock. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to you, David. Are you there? Still on mute, perhaps?
There we go. 5 seconds.
There you are.
Sorry about that. Thanks very much, David. Great to be here with you and everyone. And Bex and Amy, are you there? Can we see you on camera there as well? There we go. Hi, Amy. Hi, Bex. Great to have you with us.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for joining us, taking time out of your very busy schedules to share your insights. And for folks just joining us, we're going to hear from kind of two different organizations, a more traditional organization, power company, literally keeping the power on up in Detroit and surrounding area. And then Netflix, less traditional, more creative work, and we're going to sort of hear from both of them what's been really working to thrive through this crisis. A couple of I want to take 5 minutes or so just to kind of set up some context and also kind of get some data from you, from folks on the line. And firstly, just to let you know, this is not an update on the virus. Even though we're scientists, we're not going to be talking about the actual virus. We're going to be talking about how we deal better with it, and particularly how we deal better with it in organizations around the people side. That's the focus of this session. It's not legal or formal HR advice or medical advice. Those are all good things. That's not us. What we want to do is help you understand what's going on and help you build the right practices. And both from science, which we've focused on for the last kind of 5 weeks, and then the last few weeks we've started shifting to like what's really working in organizations. And what we want to hear from Amy and Bex is like what's really working best. We might hear from you as well in the chat, kind of what's really working best in your organizations. So a couple of minutes, first of all, I want to just, if you haven't seen this, you might find this helpful. If you have, it's a reminder of where we are. But I've been thinking a lot about the stages we're going through as a planet. Different countries, slightly different places, but largely we're all going through this, very intense experience that, I mean, you could literally say is acute distress disorder, also known as psychological shock. And it's, something in the DSM-V. Pretty much the whole planet is experiencing intense psychological shock. And what happens in a shock phase, you're kind of running on adrenaline. You don't necessarily feel the pain yet. It's kind of very intense, very disorientating. So we're sort of in that, we're sort of moving out of that. Some of you will have moved out of it already. And what's coming next, unfortunately, is this quite painful stage of especially as we realize how long this is really going to be here for. And you can't do much when someone's in shock except kind of make them safe. That's what many have been focusing on with HR practices. How do we make sure people are safe, people are okay? That's good. That's what you got to do. People in pain need something else. They're going to need tools and skills and support, maybe even coaching to kind of get through the pain. You're going to need kind of ongoing support, not just kind of one-off things, much more. And then eventually comes rehab. So sort of moving through these stages, it's, we're starting to really move to that middle stage now, which will probably be, with us for a while. We're talking a lot also about the most adaptive things to do and the pendulum that we're all been on. So this kind of denial versus panicking, this sort of, downplaying versus catastrophizing. And the middle ground involves, accepting that it's going to be rough, but believing that it's going to work out in the end. And that's that Stockdale paradox, right? The right mindset here is like, actually accepting it is going to be hard and getting to work to make it better because it'll work out in the end. That's important. Now, a critical factor is staying calm. So that you can think deeply. We're all scenario planners now. I'm working on a piece on that. We're all scenario planners now, not just people running, oil rigs and power plants. We've all got to think about, different scenarios, but none of that's possible if we're not calm. And unfortunately, the biggest challenge in this crisis right now is literally just wrestling down the threat level in all our brains. And Few of us, unless we've literally survived in a war zone, which, you know, many people in Europe and other places have, but few of us have the experience of dealing with this amount of uncertainty and lack of control and, you know, lack of connectedness with people. Few of us have had this. So this is a framework for understanding kind of what's going on in your brain. And as I explain this, think about what level you're at the moment. Don't put it in the chat. We're going to give you a poll in a second. So basically this is something we've been teaching for about 10 years, but we brought it back and kind of found this is really important. It's based on real neuroscience. It's not just a metaphor. There literally are three completely different kind of intensities of threat in your brain, involving completely different brain systems. And it's really important to understand them. Level one is basically just like your brain sees that there's a potential threat like far away that you should pay a little bit of attention to. So, you know, you're walking in the woods, you hear a bear, but it's way off in the distance bellowing. It's like, oh, that's probably miles away, but you know, I should keep my brain just a little focused on bear things, right? So you're literally, it's like having a cup of coffee. You're more alert, literally more awake, but you're not alarmed yet. And that's an important distinction. So that broader environment threat, that's okay. And in the normal course of life, we're sort of happy level one threat, happy level one threat. We go between sort of in a toward state and level one threat for, you know, dealing with deadlines. It's quite fine. The problem is level two threat. Level two threat is basically you heard the bear sort of way off in the distance and you just heard it again and it's over the hill. Now you don't know that it's coming for you. So you don't have the full level three rush, right? But basically your brain's doing this complex Boolean processing, this complex probability stuff. And trillions of neurons are basically going, it's best to basically prepare for maybe dying. So what happens is the like prefrontal resources are like subsumed by motor cortex needs up here. Your stomach stops digesting, immune system stops being as functional, oxygen and glucose goes to your extremities, you're preparing for battle. So basically level two is feeling that a threat is close enough to you that you should start getting quite anxious and alarmed. And so there is an alarming system in the brain different to the alerting system. And when that alarming system goes off, it's really pulling away resources from prefrontal. So if you're in that level two threat, you're making, you know, perceptual errors, like not seeing or hearing things correctly or at all. You're making cognitive errors, like literally doing bad math, right? You're making control errors, like not regulating emotions well. You're making social cognition errors, so not understanding other people's social cues. All of these things are very significantly degraded to the point you could say people at level two threat are exhibiting quite poor judgment indeed, and almost no creativity. So level two threat is a problem. Level three threat is the real problem because that's literally the bear running at you. And if you're experiencing that in the workplace and you don't need to actually run, your, you know, cognitive resources are just gone. And of course, level two and three has a long tail. So, you know, it affects you, you know, it affects your literally your, you know, your well-being, literally your immune system is reduced by 2 and 3. So, you know, someone asked me in the last few weeks, they're like, well, shouldn't I be at level 2 threat? And the answer is, if you need to do something physical, great. If you need to do something cognitive, disastrous, because your body is preparing for the physicality of danger. And so, I mean, the best thing you could do is actually go for a heavy walk or a run or do a workout to get it out of your system so you can think again. But level 2 threat is very, very maladaptive for, you know, general work. So that's kind of and I think this is a, you know, crisis of threat. And that's all I'll say on that. Got a bit distracted. But what we'd love to do is a poll. Hopefully I didn't make you all really threatened now. What level of threat are you at right now? With that in mind, what level of threat are you at on a Friday? It's going to be higher on a Friday. So 0 is neutral. So I'm not in a threat. We haven't put positives in, but if you're in a positive state, bless you, give us some and put neutral. Next week we'll do neutral or positive. So we'll give you another, I can see 200 of the 400 have voted. We'd love to get everyone to vote. We're at 230. Let's keep it going. We'd love you to put in the chat what level of threat you are. It's really, really interesting. We've got 3 questions for you. This is about you. We're going to ask you about other people in your organization as well in a moment. So what level of threat are you at now? So we're up to 300. Give it 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's close that off. So we've had 300 responses out of 450. So 15% of you are at neutral. Bless you. No one was at neutral 2 weeks ago. 50%, exactly 50% are at level 1. That's good. That's good. Half of you are at level 1 threat. Level 1 is probably the right state right now. You're going to need to be like deliberate and a little bit vigilant. You're going to need to be a little vigilant about washing hands and masks and all sorts of stuff. That's okay at level 1. Make sure you're also having positive experiences, because you don't want to always be at level 1. You don't want to always wake up at level 1 or get straight there, right? 30% of you are at level 2, okay? That's a red flag. So 30% of you are at level 2. That's a lot. Level 2 is seriously maladaptive, and 4%, 13 of you are at level 3. And you know, anything you can do to calm yourself at level 3 is difficult. Sometimes biological things are best at level 3. A nap, a hot drink, probably not a coffee, but you know, nice tea, a meal. Sometimes you need a meal. Sometimes you need a walk. Sometimes you need to release some energy, a walk, you know, a run. A nap is very good. So sometimes bring yourself back from level 3. You need a biological intervention, or a very powerful reappraisal. Sometimes we'll do it. So let's go to the next one. Some of you are putting things in the chat as well, which is nice to see. But let's try and put the comments in the poll if you can. So what level of threat are your people leaders? Is the next question. What level of threat are your people leaders? Okay, if you don't have people leaders, then you don't need to answer the question, but we'd love to get hundreds of people responding to this. So we've got 180, 190, 200 of you. Keep going. We'd love to get more. What level of threat are your people leaders at? And you can put some questions in any time in the Q&A as well. I'll be watching that. We'll get to Amy in just a moment. Give me another 5 seconds. We've got almost 300. A few more people, please. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, I forgot to say, all you have to do is press the button. You don't have to press return or anything else. All right, here's the data. It is actually interesting. 5%, 15 people are at neutral. That's good. That's not where we were a few weeks ago. That's good. 52% at level 1 threat and 41% at level 2 threat. So more people at level 2 threat for leaders than you personally, which is interesting. Let's go to the third poll. Frontline employees. What do you think your frontline employees are experiencing? So what do you think your frontline, and there it is right there, just what we saw last week and the week before. I'll tell you the data in a minute, but we've got 140, keep coming. What are your frontline employees? 180, keep coming. We'd love to get more. I see 1 level 0 neutral. What are your frontline employees? Keep coming. We've got 240, 250. Let's get a couple more. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's close it off. All right, I'll tell you this data. This is the scary bit. So right here we have 1% neutral. Level 1, 21%. And this is a sample poll of about 250 people, which is probably about 200 companies. So level 1, you have 21%. Guess what level 2 is? 53%. Guess what level 3 is? 26%. The frontline employees are really taking the brunt of this, and we're seeing this. And people are really concerned about frontline employees. It's really an issue. And your frontline employees are like, you know, keeping us all safe and doing the work and, you know, doing really, really critical work to keep electricity flowing and keep, you know, all sorts of important things happening. So just to, you know, keep that as a context, and really interesting to see this kind of change over time, but we've seen a definite trend of lots and lots of threat at the frontline employee level, and leaders on average being about half of them being at level 2 threat. And that's a problem for judgment and decision-making. That's all I've got from you. Let's hear what's really working. Starting with Amy. Amy, do you want to come off camera there and tell us a little bit about the organization, just for a moment, I guess, and then tell us kind of what you've been doing, what's been working, and let's have a conversation about what's happening at DTE. Thanks for joining us, Amy.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me today. I'm honored to be a part of this. It's been great working with you, David, and the team. You know, I think it's really interesting that you asked DTE to participate with Netflix. Bex and I had a chance to talk yesterday and compare notes, and knowing that, you know, what we all have in common is this deep level of empathy that is happening throughout our companies as well as the world. So when we're sitting alone in our own homes having these conversations, no matter where you are, it's a level of empathy that's connecting us across the globe in a different way, and I think everybody feels that. So trick being how do we really leverage that and use that to ensure our culture remains strong at DTE and within our own homes and families too. So just really briefly, DTE, which is many of you on the line today might not know who we are, but we are a large, over 10,000 employees, utility company, really energy company in Michigan, but we operate in many different states as well. So primarily, we have about 2.2, as you can see, million electric customers, 1.3 million gas customers. We also have a business, power and industrial business development arm to our business, and we do things like work with landfills throughout the country, to really take the methane gas that, this is just an example, that is naturally created as part of a landfill and turn it into renewable energy that we can use. So lots of different things. That's who we are, located in Detroit, Michigan, and mostly there. Now, David, you asked me a little while ago what we have found as most surprising as this pandemic started. And shortly before that, we at DTE were taking a pretty deep dive into our focus on creating a culture of service for our external customers that we support, of course, but as well as our internal customers and how we care for one another. How do we collaborate? How do we communicate? And how do we recognize? And the senior leadership and the organization spent time, quite a bit of time, identifying these 4 areas. How are we best safe? How do we show we are caring, dependable, and efficient? And this really, we haven't even rolled this out to the entire workforce yet. In fact, we are having to postpone a lot of that training. But this has taken pretty deep roots within our organization already. And it served us very well during this time, and has served as guideposts for the decisions we make, along with how we communicate, and the priority of ensuring our workforce and our customers are safe, the decisions we make around how they perceive we are caring for them and caring for one another, how are we dependable for our communities during this time, and then efficient so we can continue to deliver what matters most, which is keeping it powered.
Yeah, just a comment there, Amy. So I've been talking a lot about, when there's uncertainty and you can't do much about uncertainty, you can raise clarity. And so it's like, instead of trying to create like rules, 1,000 rules, it's like create principles, right? Principles and principles create clarity. And these keys to unlocking service excellence, these are principles. And they're like guiding principles, like whatever you do, just like make sure you stay safe, caring, dependable. Like these are the 4 things to keep coming back to. And so it's really helpful as you think about how can we create clarity as a company. Like one of the ways, for everyone else listening, is like go back to the values, or the values that really matter right now, and anchor on those. Like, hey everyone, this is what we've got to anchor on. And that sense of clarity is really helpful for people as kind of guiding principles to focus on. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, thank you. It helps us to stop and pause and reflect on our decisions and communicate it that way. So this is a little bit of a busy slide. The next few are, but it's intended to, and if anybody on the call wants any more information, I'm happy to share it anytime. But basically what's served us well now, most importantly, is a team that, by the way, many are on this call, and all of the credit for all the work at DTE goes to them. For building this, but we needed to create an opportunity every day to collect the sentiment of our workforce. So we've got frontline folks that are already in dangerous positions serving our communities every day. And so now the field folks that are out there keeping our power on, whether they are working in a plant or they are climbing the poles, there is always a sense of safety and what we call 200% accountable. How do you take care of yourself, but also others? And now with this pandemic, it's a different state, obviously, and we need to ensure we're really in touch with what's happening within our workforce. So we have a couple different ways we've done that. One, we usually do an engagement survey twice a year, and this year we paused that for our spring survey, and we turned that into a survey called Care Connect. So that had many different questions, but we're really targeted on understanding the emotional well-being of our workforce and the connectivity to their own teams and their leaders, and the belief in our leadership team around that we have their best interest in mind. Every day, there's a pulse survey we administer to all of a subset of our workforce, also checking the sentiment. And we have about 25, 30 different frontline leaders that represent all different parts of our organization that we call each morning. They are the listening ears, that third eye within their site. And all of this every day is collected together and built into a sentiment analysis report that goes to, our incident command. In addition to that, though, it's important to mention, we have another team that is working on an external scan. So what's happening with other companies? What are the key articles and the tools and the resources that are out there now? So we look at the internal employee sentiment, we look at the external, what is happening, we mirror that, put that together, and then we build our communication plan, and that changes everything.
Oh, that's great. I met with Jerry, your CEO, a couple of weeks ago. I was really impressed with how committed he was to employee well-being. Like it wasn't a hesitation for him that everyone was like it was super important to take care of everyone. But I was actually impressed with how much data he had about the different parts of the business and what the sentiment was and where it was. And now I can see where it comes from. Like he actually seemed to know like where the hot spots were. It's interesting.
Yeah, thank you. And David, you asked before too, what's serving us well right now? We've been working on our culture for many, many years. Engagement being a key, just as important. What our leadership has really talked about is the fountainhead to the rest of our outcomes as a company. And that has served us well. Our connection to purpose and Jerry's conversation around people and culture and well-being, and our purpose. We serve those in the community, the lifeblood of the communities we serve, et cetera. It's not words on the wall. So that's helping us during this time.
Yeah, no, I was really impressed with his thoughtfulness and just kind of commitment to maintaining calm and everyone being okay. It was really nice to see.
Yeah, thank you. Would you mind going to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so we take all that information and we work with our communications team. It's really a wonderful partnership there. We take the information and we update this go-to site. This is our SharePoint site that we've built for the company with communications team, all of us together. But the point of this is we've never seen so many hits on an internal site before. Every day, thousands of our workforce, this is the go-to spot. So anything you need from safety and field, of course, and just the policies, things that are changing each and every day. But I did want to highlight specifically on some of the people components that you were talking about and we're talking about today. So through the sentiment analysis, every day hear about different concerns, of course, like everybody is in the workforce, about what our team members need to feel supported from a well-being perspective, what our leaders need to help their team stay connected. And ultimately, work from home is new for us, right? We are more of a traditional company, so this is expediting our future from a technology perspective for sure. But how do we do it differently? And how do we ensure we keep our culture alive during this process and again, connect to our purpose? So if you go to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit of a collage of what's behind the scenes here.
And a bunch of you are asking good questions. I'll get to them in a minute. I'll ask Amy of those when she's gone through this. Yep. Okay,
so this is busy. This is just a collage. There are many resources behind it. But again, as I said, this is how we are updating the information. So one of the questions we asked in the sentiment analysis is how connected you feel to your leaders. You see here in leadership inspiration, all of our leaders are really active, whether it's your direct leader, your more senior leaders, but they post videos weekly, daily to their teams to stay connected. The beautiful part of this is we're all seeing each other in a different, in a different lens, and the work from home and the view into people's personal lives and the vulnerabilities and the conversations. It does take the relationships to another level when you think about those positive unintended consequences of being in this situation.
Yeah.
The burnout, the addressing anxiety, stress, it's obviously very real, and looking at well-being from a very holistic perspective. So how do we address that for our work?
Yeah, no, so people are asking some great questions. Let's
sharing. Yeah.
Maybe let's just jump into a couple of questions, or do you want to finish this slide first and then we'll do that?
Yeah, you know what, I'll just wrap these slides up and then take whatever questions are out there. I do want to mention though, one of the biggest concerns, frankly, that came from our CEO, which one of the reasons why he is as good as he is the focus around how do we ensure our field and our workforce feels recognized during this time. And knowing that our field folks are out there, whether they're dealing with the COVID situation and the concerns with customers, or we have a storm coming in, which is snowing mid-April in Michigan, for those on the call that are interested in that sad fact. But they're dealing with a lot. So how do we let them know when they don't have any access to our, they're not checking their email every day. So we really created several different recognition strategies to tie back to our service keys. We worked with communications. We have what's called our wall of gratitude. We created some real easy ways to text and say thank you, and built a long sign campaign that went to over 80 sites, just so that people, our field folks, know when they show up, they are thought of and they are cared for. So if you go to, I think, the last slide, David, then I'll just stop and take whatever questions you have. I think I have one more slide in there. Yep.
This was actually one of the questions, is what kind of resources have you been creating for leaders? So maybe you can sort of answer that through this.
Yeah, so that's great. And looking at the poll results was very interesting too, right? So, you know, you and I, when we were talking about this a few weeks back, our conversation was really around, you know, you have your leaders who are serving, who are listening from everything coming to them about the things that they need to do for their workforce to support, and then their own level of emotional well-being within the middle. And how do we provide tools for our entire organization? So, you know, in partnership with you, with NLI, we are doing a few things for our organization. One, last week, we had our first 1 hour webinar with our senior leaders, and it was a great partnership from our CEO and David taking us through this. And it goes over those essential habits and really a level of validation and understanding about what's happening, and then leaning into, you know, what you referred to earlier, certainty or threat buffers to help people best cope during this time.
We think, just to answer that, we think the essential habits are take care of yourself, look after each other, deliver what matters. They sound obvious when you say them, but it took us a long time to kind of work to get it sort of simple like that. Take care of yourself, look after each other, deliver what matters. Those are really the essential habits. And then we've got like the exact right ways of doing that within there. But sorry, go on.
No, that's great. And we wanted to get that to all of our leaders. So we have about 1,600 folks that will join us on an all leader call next week. And then really, how do we bring this to our workforce? So knowing that people are in the field, knowing that our customer call center is, you know, phones continue to ring 24/7. How do we really give people tools that they need in bite-sized packages? We're leaders. So it's a series of videos and tools, as you can see here. And there's a leader guide for people for leaders to use to take this opportunity to bring people together, and how do you create a remote chat around this and a learning opportunity together. And then there are a series of videos for our entire workforce focused on growth mindset, which really, if those of you are not already really understand that on this webinar, it's really powerful during this time. How do we lean in?
We've been doing that work with you before. Right. So we've been introducing growth mindset over the last year, and I think it's been really helpful for people as a foundation.
And then SCARF, which is how you deal with threat and reward, and then the habits that David talked about, those videos and tools and actions to go with each of it. So we'll roll that out to the rest of the workforce.
Yeah, and I think the way to think about this at high level is we're giving your people leaders tools to coach their teams on how to move through this crisis. And rather than just like content, it's like, here's how to coach your teams kind of one habit at a time to move through this crisis. And that's the way that we're thinking about it. I think people leaders are going to need tools to actually coach their teams through this, not just, you know, tips as we move out of the adrenaline phase and into just like needing to really sustain performance over time. That's interesting. Amy, I want to address some of the questions. Can you tell us a little bit more about, and some of the DTE folks have been answering online on the chat of some of the specific questions. Thanks for that. But what, how have you found like a survey fatigue? Has that been an issue, or have you been kind of surprised by that, or what have you found?
Oh, that's a great question. The pulse is just done for a subset of the population, representative cross-functionally, but people are not being over-surveyed. And the everyday sentiment gathering process from those frontline leaders, it's very short, it's very quick, and
It's a pulse and not, so you're not doing survey fatigue. And what have been some of the most useful questions that you found value in asking folks in those pulse questions?
That's great. So, one, do people feel that they can appropriately escalate issues? So we want to dive into both safety related questions as well as emotional well-being, right? So escalate issues, if we find pockets where people feel like they can't, then that's an area we are able to go in and address.
Right.
Another great question is the extent to which you feel connected to your leader and team. So when we're talking about culture and people staying together through this process, it just gives us a different level of insight. And all of this we're able to break down to levels where we can work the problems.
Yeah, no, that's great. And how are you getting this to people? Like, is it email, or sort of how are you actually like getting information back from people?
Well, the pulse survey, the daily pulse survey, is through a Microsoft Forms process, and we have a team, hopefully, who are on this call, who are really the ones that are making this happen. The daily calls we identified within our teams, within the HR organization, we connected with relationships that we already knew we had within the field with those frontline leaders. And once we ensured that it was representative of our workforce, they every morning before 9 a.m. pick up the phone and call and ask the same questions and submit it. It all goes together with that pulse form and goes forward.
Right. What's been the response percentage on the pulse survey? What kind of response rates are you getting?
That's a great question. It's pretty high. I don't have the specific number, but our numbers are not. People are very responsive right now in giving us the feedback we need to help.
Right. And certainly if you were sending everyone, a pulse every day, that wouldn't work. But I think the design of pulses is you're taking a cross section, different people all the time. Yes. I think Microsoft have a great product for that.
Yes.
Someone's put that in the chat already. Fantastic. Some great insights. I just want to kind of address a bunch of questions coming up at once that I didn't even, this might sound not true, it's actually true. I didn't even realize Amy was going into detail of the work that we've done with them. So I didn't even think of sort of how to position that or explain that, but let me just give people some context. I think that as people move into the pain stage, that they're going to need quite different resources, and the best way to scale those resources are probably giving people managers tools to coach their teams. But what they're going to need is not like content so much as like support to build habits. And so our hypothesis on this is like give people leaders a set of tools for how to just help people take care of themselves better, right? So there's a kind of set of insights around how do you take care of yourself. And a lot of that's about what we call buffers, putting in place personal buffers. And we've kind of worked out the best ones. And then like, next week or next few days or however it makes sense, how do you take care of each other better? How do we look after each other better? And we talk about scarf signals, and it turns out there are critical signals for each scarf domain. And then how do you like really focus on what matters? So we've been kind of thinking very hard, a whole kind of company, what are the most critical habits in a crisis? How do we simplify those and give people just like these little nuggets so that, entire bodies of people leaders can have tools to take to their teams and kind of coach their teams through this crisis. So that's the way they're seeing it. And this is one of the early rollouts of that concept, but it's happening in a bunch of places. Thanks, Amy. Anything else you want to add before we go to Bex?
No, I'm just happy to answer any other questions, if not today, in the future.
Great. Thanks so much for being here, Amy, and appreciate you sharing what's happening. And it's really nice to hear the care that is being taken to take care of employees. And it particularly warmed my heart when I realized you guys run nuclear power plants. And I saw just how much care that your CEO is taking with the threat level of people in those plants, and that he was, really taking seriously that they were not, getting below level 1 and, swinging into gear there. So it was great to see what you guys are doing, and thanks for the work you're doing, keeping the power on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Bex, let's go to you. So tell us about the world of Netflix, and great to have you here with us.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, and thanks, Amy. It's really great to learn from your insights. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I hope wherever you are that you and your loved ones are safe and well. My name is Rebecca Port. I'm a VP of Talent at Netflix. Talent is the word we use for HR. Most people refer to me as Bex, so most people, that's what you will hear David calling me. I want to talk about our culture and the way that our culture has really helped us lead through this crisis. And so the Netflix culture is pretty well documented, and a key overriding part of our culture is really people over process. And we're used to operating with high degrees of freedom, where we give leaders lots of freedom and responsibility. And so one of the things that's helped us throughout this crisis is really our leaders being used to making decisions. One of our values is judgment, and we have a series of stunning colleagues that we expect to have great judgment. And so again, our employees are used to exercising decision power and using good judgment. And so in environments where there's not a playbook, our employees and our leaders have really stood up and responded quite well. Flexibility has helped us as well. So as a tech company, and we've had the technology for, that's just how we operate in terms of these kinds of sessions, and doing most of our meetings through VC. So we are used to having our employees work wherever they want to work, in whatever way they want to work. And that's really allowed us to be much more flexible. We haven't, like some companies, had to quickly invest in technology. We haven't had challenges with our culture around presenteeism and leaders thinking that people need to be in the office to be more effective.
Bex,
So,
I'm seeing that collective sigh of relief as everyone hears that everything's okay at Netflix and it's keep running. It's like, thank goodness, bless you.
well, we're really delighted to be bringing joy to people at such a difficult time. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep all the service on and great content coming to you. So in terms of some of the things that we've done that have stood out really well, I mean, all of this is backed up by our strong culture, and we've really leaned into leading through our culture, as we always do. And I will talk about some specifics, but for me, 3 themes really stood out around compassion, communication, and connection. Now, we're not a traditional HR function, not surprisingly probably, and we have a very low HRBP to employee ratio. So our HRBPs work with groups of around about 150 people, and we really expect them to be coaches. So throughout this time, as our HRBPs always do, they've really leaned into coaching our people leaders. And the 3 sort of clumps I want to talk about, I'll start with compassion. One of the things that has surprised me and delighted me is just the rise of humanity that I've seen throughout the organization and throughout our leadership team. And just as Amy mentioned, the deep degree of empathy that people have, and that leaders have. And there's something about everybody experiencing a challenging situation right the way across the globe that has meant that compassion has been what we've led with.
Can you give me an example of something that sort of jumped out that really comes to mind?
Yeah, and so I think just recognizing that it's hard. So right from the CEO to his team, throughout the people leaders, recognizing that this is really difficult, and recognizing that people have a whole series of additional stresses that they're now dealing with, whether or not that's having to homeschool and care for children that are home, dealing with social isolation, anxiety or depression or loneliness, caring for loved ones that may be sick, being anxious about what's going on in the world. And so we have really leaned into saying it's okay that we know that you can't give as much in a COVID world as what you could in the pre-COVID world, and that's okay. And we genuinely mean that. And again, repeating that to people and helping people set their own boundaries and communicate those boundaries to their manager and say, this is what I can give because during these hours I'm schooling my children. And really helping people think that that's okay.
Yeah, that's a big one. We've been looking at the signals that leaders need to send, right? There are these buffers that we need personally, and then signals we need to send as leaders. And one of the big ones is fairness. And that's the F in scarf. And you've got to, it's so important that you like really acknowledge that the difference in capacity people have, because some people are actually at 130% because they're not traveling anymore, and if they don't have kids and stuff, like they're actually able to do a whole lot more, right? And other people are literally at 30%, right? They can hardly do anything. And like respecting that and addressing that, acknowledging that, and working with that, I think is such an important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've found just being really open within teams around that. And if you're at 130%, what can I give you? And if I've got 30%, what are the things that I should ruthlessly prioritize? So
have you managed to find anything great for the working the parents who are having to school? Have you managed to like do anything with that?
Look, I think that that's a really challenging one. So we have an ERG, or an employee resource group called The Village, and they've been fantastic at pulling together resources and great books and websites and kids yoga classes and things like that. But I think having this empathy and understanding of what can you give right now, and that's okay. And allowing people the freedom to do what they need to do and take care of themselves and their family.
Right. So it's more about giving people the autonomy to like be able to manage it and fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah. And again, this ruthless prioritization. So asking people to scrub non-essential meetings, really focus on, what is the work that needs to be done, and dropping other stuff, which allows people to create that more space. Because even if you are living by yourself, you don't have a family to take care of, and you can give 130%, the risk of burnout is huge. And so we don't want our employees to do that, obviously. So we've really leaned into mental health as well. And we've done that in a number of ways. We've had mental health practitioners do group sessions with the HRBPs. We've had mental health resources work with them either one-on-one or within groups. We've changed our employers, our EAP program that you used to have. There was a cap on the number of sessions you could have with therapists. We've lifted that. We've run mindfulness sessions in local languages across the world. We've changed our health benefits so that employees are now covered regardless of where they are in the world, because we've had a number of employees who have either gone to a different state or a different country to be with loved ones. And really talking about and getting leaders talking about mental health as something that we've really leaned into. And again, that compassion and trying to be understanding that people are under significant pressure right now.
Right, right.
We've also looked at sort of some of our HR processes there are very few, but we do have a formal 360 process that we normally run in March, and we've postponed that. And so we put that on hold, recognizing that right now employees have other things to deal with. So that was just a thing that we could take off of their plate, and we'll bring it back when the time appropriate.
And is that, what about performance reviews? Because someone was asking about that. Have you stalled those, or what are you doing with that?
We don't do performance reviews. So we don't have a formal traditional performance management. We believe in giving feedback and dealing with performance challenges, be them positive or negative, as they rise.
Right. Yeah, no, fantastic. There's lots of great questions coming in, by the way. So
yes, so I'm not paying attention to the questions.
No, don't. I've got them for you.
I will answer lots of questions. Communication. I think communication has been a really great thing for us. Like Amy, we set up a web page with a series of resources. We have a daily email that goes out that gives transparency to all information COVID related. And some days there's no update and we say, not a lot to tell you today, have a great day. And some days there's lots of information. But our employees have been really receptive to us being open and honest. And if we can't answer those questions, we again say, we've heard you ask this question, we don't know the answer yet, we'll come back to you when we do.
Yeah, fantastic.
So try, and then another thing from a communication perspective, we are working with a doctor, a medical doctor who is an infectious disease specialist, both a researcher and a practitioner. And he's advising our task force on how to react to some of the things. And we've set up a series of sessions with him and employees. So similar to this, a web cast that people can can dial into and ask questions in an open doc.
Right.
And they're things like, should I be eating takeaway food? How do I wash the vegetables at the supermarket? And that's gone down really well. And hearing from an expert in this area has been useful, because I think access to valid information is one of our challenges right now.
Right. Yeah, no, that's important. Everyone's really struggling with that. Fantastic. What do you think's been the most kind of useful resource you've provided out of all the great things you've been doing? What do you think, or maybe the top three, what do you think's been most, sort of celebrated there?
So I think the stuff around the communications and the doctor have been really great. I think also just this notion of kind of leaning into connection and having our HRBPs act as coaches, because everyone's at a different place. And so I don't think there's kind of one thing that's helped all employees, but having HRBPs coaching each of the leaders on how to connect with your team and meeting your team at where they're at. And, some of our teams are incredibly busy because it's quarter close. Some of our teams, like say our events team, are less stretched right now, right? So I think having HRBPs to really lean into the coaching and providing ways for leaders to connect with their employees. And we've done that in a series of different ways, whether it's, building resources to help leaders lead more effectively, helping new employees on board virtually, but also things like having a bit of fun. So having a pizza party with your team, so sending your team and their families pizzas, or dressing up as your favorite Netflix character for your team meetings, or, trying to really, our aim is to create a fun, stimulating, productive work environment. And that's pre-COVID and also post-COVID. So how can we do that in this unique environment?
Right. It sounds like, and some great questions. Thanks, Beck. I'm going to sort of weave some of the questions into the conversation for about probably 8 minutes or so. We've got, it sounds like you paused talent review. Is that right? So you paused the talent review processes?
Yeah, so like I said, we don't really have a talent review process. And so the only formal process we do is we do a formal 360 where people can give written feedback to each other. And we've paused that, yes. We've
paused that, great. So there's no formal process or talent review or performance management anyway. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, great. And what, no, it's interesting. A lot of people asking about like benefits. What have been the benefits that people have found most, like people have most appreciated, sort of the benefits you've given people, the additional benefits in this time? What have people really celebrated?
So I think people have really appreciated sort of our flexibility. So helping people get back to wherever they want to get back to. So if we've had employees abroad and they've wanted to come back to the US because they're a US citizen, I think, giving additional mental health resources has been really well received. And so I think that those things would be the main things.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good to know. And also the VPs of HR and the HR business partners as coaches. Say a little more about that. People are asking like, how were they trained? And just to say a little bit more about the HR business partners as coaches.
Yeah, so our HR business partners, what we select for are people that want to be coaches. We don't prescribe to any particular sort of coaching model. We're very flexible, and it's all about freedom and responsibility. And we position them in the organization in a way that they show up as coaches. And the small number of employees that they are dealing with means that they can really lean into that.
Yeah, no, interesting. Are you finding any concerns from particular demographics of employees, like, or countries, or are you seeing sort of any hotspots like that?
I think it's really difficult to say that it's sort of particular. I mean, I think overall, there's concern of those people that live by themselves, because I think especially in the US and Europe, which is largely on lockdown, in Asia, in Korea, we're back in the office because some of the government restrictions have been lifted there. So I think it differs across the globe. And what we're really trying to do is to sort of meet employees where they're at and understand them as individuals.
Right. But each person has like 100 to 150 people that they're supporting, but they're generally more acting as a coach than as a sort of formal HR business partner, it sounds like.
Yeah,
philosophically.
yeah. And obviously they lean more into the leaders than they do the individual contributors, but still, again, making sure that HRBPs have office hours where anybody can kind of, you know, knock on their door, as it were, and have conversations with them.
Yeah, no, fantastic. We've done a bit of work over the years in developing those kinds of teams, and I know we have an open conversation on that. One day, hopefully we'll get back to that. There's some fun skills to just make those folks even faster at coaching in terms of like how to really kind of bring people to insight as fast as possible. That's kind of the way we think about it, which is applicable to any model or any frame. It's just kind of how do you understand the mechanisms of coaching so you can take someone from kind of impasse to insight as fast as possible. That's been our approach. A lot of people are asking something contentious. I'm sort of in mixed emotions about asking it because I have a contentious point of view on this. But you know, are you starting to think about the sort of post thing and kind of coming back to work? Are you starting to think about that? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah, great question. And yes, I think like probably many of the people on the call, we're starting to think about it. We certainly don't have any great solutions. Our goal will be to provide a safe and as productive workplace as we possibly can. And I suspect that that will look different across the world depending on what government restrictions are in place, what the state of the infection is within each country. So yeah, we've got no firm plans just yet.
Right. I mean, the contentious part of that is, I think many of us, maybe not you, Bex, and some others on the line, but I think many of us in the world our psychological immune system is stopping us from processing the fact that this is going to be here for a very long time. And that we're all kind of living in this like, oh, hopefully in May, and, you know, the media's playing that a bit. And, you know, hopefully in May things get back to normal, but there's no way this is going to look anything like full normal for, you know,
I completely agree. And, you know, the scenario planning that we're doing is looking at like, what does the work environment look like in a socially distanced world?
Right. Yeah. It's going to be socially distanced for a year. Let's face it, at least, if not 2 years, somewhere in that area. And so how do we sort of settle into that? You know, how do we sort of grieve for that? Like some people are just not willing to think that, but in a month we'll all be realizing that. But how do we kind of, you know, process that and go, all right, so we're going to be massively socially distanced for at least a year. Some people will be out, some not, but that's going to be the norm. So how do we work with that?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and scenario planning, you mentioned that, I mentioned it earlier, you know, scenario planning is what you do when you can't predict the future. What you do is you basically develop, you know, no more than 3 scenarios of kind of what the future might look like. And you really expand those and extrapolate those, think about all the implications, what you do, and then continue to update your models as you go. And it was invented in the 70s by the oil industry, by Shell at the time, Royal Dutch Shell, but it's a whole school of thought for managing critical industries like oil rigs and, you know, power plants. And we're kind of all scenario planners now for our families. Even we should all be thinking, you know, hey, if we're out in 3 months, it looks like this. If we're out in 9 months, it looks like this. If we're out in, you know, whatever. So we kind of need to be doing that a lot more, but that takes some deep thinking to do that. And you can't do that scenario planning if you're at the left of that pendulum, if you're just, you know, in denial. And you also can't do it if your brain's exploding because you don't have the resources if you're level 2 or 3 threat to think about that. So you kind of have to get calm and quiet and then think about your scenarios, which is sort of right back to that early slide that I shared. But Bex, there's a few comments from people on this. And I'd just love to hear your view on this, but a number of people saying, you know, it sounds like you kind of were already like, you know, treating people like humans and already had great empathy and already kind of had the right culture in place, that this was just like another thing to come along and sort of, that people were sort of prepared for this in some way. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, our culture was, or is, incredibly strong and has really stood us in good stead. You know, I don't think anybody was prepared for this until it came. I don't think anybody predicted or expected that this was going to be the way 2020 played out. But certainly having great leaders, who are, you know, really focused on putting employees first and showing great empathy, who are compassionate people, has really stood us in great stead.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I just posted something in the chat, which just really is the central question I think we're all wondering in some ways, like how might we adapt and encode this level of human commitment in organizational DNA post-COVID? Like, how do we do that? And like, that's something for us to all think about,
Yeah, I think it's, I think whilst things are really difficult right now, I do think that, as we come out of this, and I know we talk about sort of, the world is going to be different for a year or 2 years, or, in the relative short term, I do think it's rare that we get a chance as a race to have the entire world go through something at the same time. And so I'm hoping that this deepened level of empathy and compassion will last, not just in organizations, but also in the way that we, lead our personal lives.
I think it will. I think there's a lot of this, and that's a conversation for future weeks. I think actually we've got Bob Johansson in the next few weeks joining us from the Institute for the Future. He's the world's leading futurist. He's going to join me on one of these on a Friday, sort of starting to think about how this is going to affect the world. It should be really fun. Join us again if you can for that. It's interesting. We rethought our organization's mission about a year ago, and it's now making organizations more human through science. And we're like, what? How did you get that right? It's bizarre. And that's literally what we're trying to do is help organizations be more human through science, and literally bring the sort of, the human stuff back to the fore. So we're kind of busy, not as busy as you guys are maybe, but we're kind of busy in a whole lot of ways. So yeah, and I see people putting in the chat kind of ideas for future topics. Love to hear kind of what you're interested in. We've got Deb Bubb, who's the Chief Learning Officer at IBM, 400,000 people joining us the next few weeks. We've got, as I mentioned, Bob Johansson. We have a whole session on kind of what's the future is going to look like a bit. We have Gartner joining us for one of those. So we're going to have lots of different sessions coming up. Bex, one quick question, and maybe give us some tangible examples in sort of a minute. What have been the most inspiring things, if you can be tangible or specific, that leaders have done that have really kind of moved you? Any sort of big ones to lead us with?
Look, I think the communication that we've had from, right from the very top. I think, the Netflix hardship fund that we've put in place across the world to help the industry. We've looked at, lots of our employees have said, how can we help and be altruistic and help other people? So Netflix is, we have an employee matching scheme. So if you donate to a charity, we will match it, and we've doubled the matching. And so really just having this kind of altruistic sign and messages and actions has been really humbling.
Fantastic. Bex, it's so great to have you. Thanks so much for making the time. I know you've inspired a ton of people. There's lots and lots of comments on the chat, and folks, we'll try and answer some of your questions. So, digitally, we can see, particular questions from particular people. We'll do our best to answer those. I really appreciate you being here. I just want to do some sort of closing things, but Bex, thanks very much for being here. And also Amy, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And there's lots of wonderful comments online from 400 or so people here. A couple of quick closing comments. As we bring this to the end, we've got about a minute. I just do want to get a quick poll going. If you're willing to stay on, that would be wonderful. We are helping organizations in a bunch of ways. I just want to say virtual can actually be fantastic. We've been doing it for years, a bit like Bex. We've got some ways for making virtual meetings actually way better, faster, more inclusive. And I'm telling you, absolutely based on data, we can do better than you've ever done in your leadership programs or training programs virtually. We can give you better habit activation at far cheaper, at far faster, like even intense leadership experiences. We can do it better for you online than you've ever had it virtually. And we have data on that. So I won't go into it, but just drop us a line if you want to talk more about kind of transitioning your programs to virtual things. We can take your existing program, or we have some fantastic content, ready to go as well, or custom. So just know that if you're interested in the virtual stuff, this is a great post, 5 ways science shows how to make virtual work better. We'll put this in the chat as well, kind of walking through. If you want to stay connected to me personally, David Rock 101 on Twitter, I sort of post everything that we're writing, but also if you're in our database every week or two, you'll get kind of what we've been writing and, key things coming out. And then, we're helping organizations focus. We're doing a lot of briefings, as we did with Amy. We're doing some really creative stuff. As Beck said, remember the whole planet is sharing this with you. This is the toughest moment of people's lives. If we can help you kind of focus on the right habits, then fantastic. If you could launch the poll, Gabe. Think of us as a cognitive science consultancy who helps you activate just the right habits at scale. And we think we've got something on how to focus that helps people identify the level of threat and know just the right habits to focus on. So if you could just click the poll there, it would really help us know kind of how to follow up with you. Focus is a solution like we have with Amy of just like helping everyone focus, take care of yourself, look after each other, deliver what matters. So we'll leave that up for about 30 seconds or so. Just in closing, thanks again, Bex and Amy. Really appreciate you being here, inspiring everyone. We'll do a bit of a write-up of some of the big insights from here as well. I hope you and your family and loved ones and teams stay well and get through this as best we can. And it's probably going to be a marathon with a whole series of sprints. So it's a bigger marathon maybe than we're ready for. So take care of yourself, look after each other, and keep delivering what matters, which in your case is internet and Netflix. Keep it up. We appreciate it a lot. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you.
Everyone behind the scene. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And hopefully this was awesome for you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Amy and Bex, and of course, David, for today's session. In an era of constant concerns, I think you all left us feeling hopeful and armed with real workplace strategies and ideas that I'm sure a lot of us can put into work right now. And of course, thanks to all of you for attending and bringing your ideas to light in the comments and Q&A section. We really get a lot out of that. I hope you got a lot from each other out of that. I'm really proud of our team in the background for not interrupting Bex to ask about Tiger King, so kudos to us. A couple quick reminders before we let you go, and if you need to drop, of course, please do so at your leisure. For those remaining, if you'd like to watch this webinar again or share with colleagues, a recording will be made available by end of business today. Today's follow-up email will be sent by Mary Grace Rapola, and you can respond to her directly in her email to explore deeper conversations with client advisors. Your Brain at Work Live will continue ongoing Fridays at noon. As David mentioned, next Friday's episode will feature two new guests, Deb Bubb of IBM and Brian Kropp of Gartner. And Anna, hopefully we'll drop a link in the chat to that. So be sure to join us and stay up to date with all of our upcoming global programming. We also run webinars from our offices in EMEA and APAC, so you can see everything coming up in the next couple of weeks there. This otherwise concludes our session for today. On behalf of the NLI team and our panelists today, we wish you safety and good health during these challenging times. Hope to see you again next week. Thanks very much for joining. Take care out there.
Thanks, everyone. Be well.